Hello and welcome to Nerdarchy. For nerds, by nerds, I'm Nerdarchy Steve. Tonight I'm hanging out with this nerd.
Nerdarchy is Ted. How are you doing this fine and lovely evening, sir?
I'm a doing, man. Just thinking about things, about D&D things, and I was contemplating some of my D&D and the castle games, and that kind of like led me to the idea for tonight's topic: what makes D&D D&D. It's like how far afield do you go with the game before it's not really D&D anymore, and maybe you're just using the rules.
It's an interesting thought. I mean, especially once you start, looking at some of the material that's out there, and like let's put aside for the moment, third party stuff. We'll come to it. But when you start taking in Spelljammer and Eberron and Ravenloft, you know, like these take things into very different directions that
Mm.
like are not the typical D&D that I started playing, 30 plus years ago. And I'm not saying any of it is wrong, far from it. I enjoy every aspect of it. But we when we started playing D&D, like we were hardcore blinders on, it's fantasy or we don't touch
Yeah, no black powder, none of that kind of stuff. Tally chiming in levels, classes, clunky spell rules. Uh, yeah, so yeah, like, is it the rules that make D&D what it is? Is it the history? Is it the lore? Is it something else? Like I've heard some people describe D&D as its own genre, right? Because you can play
sure.
tons of fantasy games that have nothing to do with D&D. We've played Morkborg, we've played Shadow of the Demon Lord,
Yep.
Pathfinder, which is just a D&D derivative.
I mean, you've
Warhammer.
also got Easy D6, you've got Index Card RPG, you've got Quest. Like there are lots of rule sets that can be used. Cipher system that lots of rule sets that can be used for anything. And some people are like, oh well, I'm going to use that to play D&D. Dungeon World's another one. Like you've got these D&D clones that exist that it's like, okay, well, if I want to play a D&D game, usually I would rather just play D&D. Now
Hmm.
the mechanics of Shadow of the Demon Lord, I'm all about it. I'm there for it, which is why I eagerly got into Shadow of the Weird Wizard when that went up on Kickstarter, and I'm waiting for the books to eventually get dropped. Uh,
Well,
but
I
it's
feel
a
like that's just it though. Like, there's plenty of other games that are fantasy that could probably suck you in, but usually have like specific lore or rules that you find interesting and exciting. Where if someone was kind of like, let's just play generic fantasy, but not play D&D, like that part might be weird. Although we kind of did do that. Like,
sure.
back in the day, we'd switched from 4E to playing supers, uh, which we started with Heroes Unlimited. Then we kind of found Mutants and Masterminds. Like, oh, we really like this system, and they had tons of supplemental books to play all kinds of different games, including like a swords and sorcery version. So we ended up playing. Well, one, we did an urban fantasy game that you ran,
Yep.
um, which very, I think that was pretty. That's very far removed from D&D. But then we did like a regular, like, straight up fantasy game that we just used that rule set for, right? Which is
Right.
like, those stories were a lot more similar to to D&D fantasy, right? But that was also because like 4E had come out and we kind of got bored with it and started like ADHD for TTRPGs kicked in, and we started like wandering in different directions right before coming back to D&D for 5E. But D&D is also the progenitor for a lot of TTR, right? Like,
Absolutely.
you can see the DNA in there, right? Even like, a lot of there's tons and tons of OSR games um that are basically just streamlined, from the home set, box set, right? So it's like,
Right.
Yeah, like have you really moved away from D&D? There's a comment from Tally, another one. Cribbed Cliff Notes from Tolkien. Yeah, although I feel like they cribbed Cliff Notes from everything. So they're pretty
Right.
Gary Gygax and Dave Anderson were pretty indiscriminate in who they stole from when it came to D&D lore, which which is fine. Like we 100% support that as long as it's not actual plagiarism. Which they also did a
Right.
little bit of that and had to had to retract some books.
Now, what I will say, when it comes down to, and for everybody, it might be a little bit different. And I'm, hardcore saying it probably is because everybody who has played multiple editions of D&D has a rule set that they feel like this is the one. This is the one
Yeah.
that did it best. And to me, of all the editions that I played, fourth feels the least like D&D. Like my biggest complaint was it didn't feel like we were playing D&D. And that's why like we only gave it a year and a half before we moved on to other things. And
So
it's
going down that road, right? That kind of like dovetails into a question I was going to ask you. I was going to say, for you to show up for a game of D&D, what would have to be changed for it to not feel like D&D anymore, right? And you kind of just brought up fourth edition. What do you think it was about fourth edition that made it not feel like D&D?
so while a lot of the lore was recycled and a lot of, you know, the fantasy elements that, we bring into, our own games was there, the actual play style of the game, it felt more like a video game or a board game, uh, because like you had the cards and like we were literally playing Magic the Gathering with them of like, okay, I toggle this card to say that I've used this power for the day or for the encounter. So like everybody had like more space at the table that they took up, and like instead of just a regular character sheet, like I would have a binder, which I'd have my character sheet, and then I'd have card pages to put my little encounter powers and whatnot in, or my power things. Uh, and while the rule set seemed, decent, it had a lot of good things going for it. Um, it just did not come across at the end of the day like a D&D game. You know,
Now, let
you
me ask you a
you
question,
can
right?
sure,
Kind of like to kind of like dig down on the things you just said before you move on.
sure.
What if fourth edition comes out? There are no like the powers are all the same, but instead they're listed like class features in 5e or third edition, right? And it's just
Hmm.
like you can do this thing, do damage, you do your weapon damage, plus move, one creature 15 feet in a direction. There are no cards, right? Do you think that that brings it back to D&D and people would even notice?
I'd have to literally play a session like that and see where it's like, okay, I can just toggle off of uh toggle off of a D&D Beyond sheet or on my character sheet. Okay, I use this, and I have to kind of you know manage it that way and see what that looks like, see what that feels like. Because I do feel the way we played, had me like we enjoyed the game, so we wouldn't have kept going for a year and a half if we
Yeah,
weren't enjoying ourselves. But at the end of the day, it was just like there was something that just wasn't there.
yeah.
Something there that was there that wasn't normally. So it's kind of hard to look back on more than a decade ago, of how did it feel, and trying to remember that. But
I don't, and
I don't
this
know
is
because
by no means of is this is by no means like let's dump on 4E, but
no, not at all.
it's interesting because when you're talking about what makes D&D, and for us, the thing that had us go away from 4E was the fact that it didn't feel as D&D as previous editions, and it was really easy for us to just kind of wander off. It wasn't like we didn't have. I would say our group did not have the visceral reaction that I've heard from other people. They're like, "This is D&D the board game. This is D&D or WoW the tabletop game." Or like, I don't feel like we had that visceral reaction. We just kind of got like played it for a little while, started playing other things, and because we didn't have that same emotional connection to that version of the game. It didn't pull us back the way other editions of D&D always did. Like, because we, like we primarily played D&D, but occasionally we'd wander off and play something else. But we quickly would go back to D&D.
Right.
And what do you think? What do you think the pull is for our group? Going back to D&D, because I will say, like, we're fortunate in the sense that we've always had a consistent groups. The sizes changed going up and down, but we still always come back to D&D. We don't really have that issue where people are like, well, I have to play D&D because that's all anybody wants to play and I can't get any players. Like, we don't have that going for it, going against us, I should say.
Right.
But all the same, like, the siren song of D&D was always there for us.
Well, at its core, like despite the fact that, I love the Dresden Files and I love Star Wars and Star Trek and what have you, the I am deeply rooted in fantasy. Dragons fit far better in a fantasy landscape. You can play post-apocalyptic, you can play modern games, you can play futuristic games, but I feel like at the core of me, fantasy is always going to be the primary setting for RPGs that I want to play. You can't see them all here, but I've got, shelves worth of games that, I'm wanting to play or that I have played that aren't typical D&D, but I I love them, but when push comes to shove, I'm going to play more D&D than anything else. Like when I look at, our regular games, like right now, I've got 4 monthly games that I play in, and 3 of them are D&D.
Yeah.
Uh, you know, Only one of them is not D&D, but that's the core of that particular group. Like we play something that's not D&D and we rotate the DMs out, and that's what we do. And I'm here for that. I'm always enjoying playing other games. But there are times that I've sat down at a table when we're playing something else, and I'm like, I might rather be playing D&D tonight, but that's just who I am.
So, like I was saying, like I was thinking about like games that I'm running, games that I'm consider running. I have a new D&D in the Castle hardcore mode pitch I'm thinking about. Um, and like I'm running currently, and I'm going to do some one shots at Gen Con. Matter of fact, I have one table with openings left. There's 3 slots. So there's a link in the description. You can check that out if you want to play in my Under the Dome game. And but for Under the Dome, like that setting is very non-traditional D&D. It's kind of like Ebron meets Dark Sun in some ways, if I had to kind of define it. Um, which makes sense because like the concept for that game is post-apocalyptic from the world we're already running, right? And the world we're already running has a lot to do with chaos magic and a lot of it being kind of released into the world and this being very hostile towards the world and those designings that live there. Um, and then I ran Other Skies for D&D in a Castle, which was a game that we had run for a completely different system, a generic system, and it was like fantasy, cyberpunk, espionage, and eldritch horror all mashed together, right? So it's like, how do you turn that into D&D? And I had to create like specific rules for it where basically, characters could over channel their abilities to greater effect. Not a single player used it. in that game. There's some potential for consequences like corruption, and you might grow weird appendages from places. Uh, but so it was we used D&D, a lot of stuff from D&D, but there was also there had to be hacking of the rules. Under the Dome, a little bit of that as well, and now I'm thinking about doing a game, pitching it for hardcore mode. Hopefully I didn't steal the idea from you, Ted, because I can't remember what are my ideas and other people's that I've heard before. But we talked about in our world there, like we kind of break it into ages like every fantasy world does. But we had an age where there was all out war between like these high mages and dragons, right? How the frig do you go up against dragons if you're just mortals? Well, you build giant golems that are basically like arcana mechs, right? So I'm
Yeah,
like,
that was my idea.
oh,
But
then I won't pitch it.
no, it's fine. It's fine. The concept that I initially
uh,
had was actually like a touring through the ages.
okay.
So like, you would essentially be playing your character and some of their ancestors as you
Yeah.
went through time. So like one session would be like your characters, in these mechs fighting dragons. But like you could pitch that whole thing as a nope, you are just gonna go back to
That's all I wanted to
just
do is pitch that, right? Like well, not so much dragons, but I was gonna like I was kicking around some names like Rise of the Titans or Return of the Titans or something like that. But basically, like not necessarily dragons, but like kaiju style monsters like Tarrasques and things of that nature are awakening, and they have to find a way to fight them and defeat them. And the way is discovering these arcana mechs and bringing them back into the world, and literally just doing kind of Pacific Rim,
Mhm.
in a D&D game. The through the ages things isn't for me. uh, I don't know. I think you know me. I fucking hate anything with multiple characters in a single
Right.
game. I just like, I don't know. It's cheese mode that I don't care for. But I think the guy that's in charge of like, or one of the people in charge of accepting things from D&D in the castle loves that stuff. So kudos to you. And they've done a few of them. I don't know
Uh-huh.
why. I don't know why I have such a visceral reaction to like doing that in D&D with multiple characters and stuff. The closest I've gotten is with our current game of Gamma World, because
Mhm.
I gave you guys substitute characters for the
Right.
arena games. But I really just mean that for the play, not like I don't really want to see them being switched in and out throughout the game because that just give me agita for some reason.
Sure. And that's why we have a primary and a, here's your second string for the actual playing of the sports ball.
Yeah, yeah. Or if your character died.
Or hopefully we won't see too much of that, but
Let's see, Zaragon. Thankfully, went straight from 30 plus years of Hero Quest into 5e. Damn, that's a lot of Hero Quest. I've heard of two people that like 4e, and one of them was Scat Garraby. Our buddy Anthony Amato, rest in peace, loved 4e. That was his jam.
Doug felt that
Yeah.
4E was the best edition.
Yeah, that's true too. Like from a game standpoint, I think it was designed super well. Like the things that you say make it don't feel like D&D. All they did was go, how can we streamline this thing that we're doing, all right, and make it less clunky? And once they did that, like that's the thing that made it not feel like D&D. And they kind of like beg, borrowed, and steal from other things like video games, who initially stole from them first. So it was kind of just like taking their own stuff back. But as a whole, D&D players did not like that packaging at all. And we get a lot of 4e isms into 5e as well.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a scenario that we take the best of the editions that came before. We learn from our our predecessors, however you want to look at that.
Yeah. So I was
Uh,
kind of wondering too, like with some of the ideas, like when I'm pitching to like D&D in a castle, like am I moving too far afield from what D&D players actually want? Because me personally, as a GM, I'm just kind of bored with like standard fantasy. Like we've done so much of it for so long. I start doing weird shit a lot more often than not anymore when I'm pitching games. Like like we have a whole process for when as GMs when we like switch up the group or the game or whatever, we started doing like when whoever's going to GM will pitch like a handful of ideas, and I might have like one kind of like stock standard issue idea in there, but the rest of them are fucking weird.
and there's nothing wrong with that, and when I look at things, I'm all over the place. I mean, I try to do things that other people might not think of doing. Um, when you look specifically at my D&D in a castle stuff, like the last game that I ran, characters were dragon riders.
Yeah.
So like I made a modified rule set of like, okay, regardless of what class you go with, you're going to get a mount and you're going to stylize your mount. So therefore, like you're essentially playing a second character. It's not going to talk, but mechanically, the adversaries had to be that much more powerful because you've got mounts for every single character that are there. Speed wise, characters are going to be all flying, so you can traverse things a lot easier and a lot faster. So certain obstacles weren't going to be considered.
I do have a
Uh,
question about that game.
yeah.
Did you do anything for them as far as falling?
So they could, uh, get a harness. That if they were somehow knocked off their mount, they were strapped to, and they could climb back up, but it would be an action to kind of
Okay.
get back in.
I didn't know if
Uh,
you're like raw dogging it where it's like if you get knocked off your mount, you're gonna take 20d6, or like Ted's done in other games, is you just die. It's like I'm not doing
so
that. Maximum velocity is death, okay?
yes, there are times where I feel like it is astronomical, amount of damage. Just be like, nope, you can't fall from that far and expect to be like, nope, I'm just gonna brush that off. And in my games, where sections of the earth had like risen up and they were miles above the surface, so it's like, well, if you fall, number one, you have no way of getting back to, where everybody is. So it's like I straight up said at the beginning of the game, like essentially during session 0, I'm like, this is the new world. If you are on one of these floating continents and you fall, you are falling for miles. There is no, hey, I'm alive. No, you're just dead. So be cautious anytime you're fighting, on or near the edge. But that also becomes, something that the players can use as well. And there were a couple of times where there were encounters that were at and over the edge. So like creatures were like crawling up the sides. And a couple of times it got close, but the players all managed to have items that could either teleport them or you know get themselves back in some way, shape, or
Some players
form.
even
But
went old school and been like, I keep a javelin with a rope attached to
yeah, uh, and I'm here for that. Like if you want to be creative, I'm down. But sure,
it.
but if you fall and you're on a and you were on a mountain, you're you know up above the ocean. Okay, well now you're falling and you've fallen into water, regardless of whatever damage you're going to take and what have you. Until your dragon comes down to come get you, or somebody else comes to come get you, you're out of the fight. Like, there's no like, okay, well, I just get back up. No, you got to swim. Are you wearing plate mail? Oops. Like, it's a problem.
All right, Zargon's asking an important question here. What is your favorite aspect of D&D? The pillars, the alignment, the D20 system, character building, spellcasting, dragon boobs, etc. You don't have to answer it, Ted. We all know what you like. Um,
Dear Lord.
like one picture for one edition, goddamn it, that nobody liked. Never hear the end of it. Um, nah, so that's tough. Like, I don't know what to draw. Like, it might even just be nostalgia, to be honest with you, because it's like the first RPG game I played. Much like Ted, I do enjoy fantasy. Like the first books I've ever read were The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. So probably a lot of nostalgia connections for me like that, and remembering as a kid playing with my friends. Um, which in hindsight, those games weren't nearly as good as the games we play nowadays. They weren't nearly as narrative. We had no idea what we're doing, but it was just like the camaraderie, getting around the table and throwing funny shaped dice is a huge draw to me. But granted, you could do that with a lot of TTRPGs. It's just that D&D's our TTRPG that we kind of grew up with, and it's like at a certain point, it's just like I don't know if it's like Stockholm syndrome at this point, or like you've been in an abusive relationship for so long you just can't get out, or if it's true love or not. But
So
that's what it is.
I don't think it's a Stockholm syndrome because, like, realistically, the amount of other games that we have played, I mean, whether you look at, the games that we've played on the channel, or if you look at the games that we've talked about on the channel that we've played games off air, like, we have had a lot of exposure. And if we found a game that's like, oh my God, this is the end all be all, like, I think that we are enough of an adults that we just be like, all right, this is the direction that we're going. It's not like, oh, D&D is still, the number one game. So like we have to stay with it. I don't think that's the kind of people we are. Um, as far as a favorite aspect of the game, I don't think it's any one thing. I don't think you could pin it down. Sure, the pillars are great, but the pillars can be applied to any tabletop role playing game, because if you're going to have conflict, and you don't have to necessarily describe it as combat, but conflict in itself is necessary to create drama and to drive the story forward,
Well,
to create
a
tension.
great example is
You
I'm
know,
pretty sure there's a Jane Austen TTRPG. And,
yes.
and no, I know that part's correct, but
Okay.
but I think part of it is like you're trying to attract a spouse or a husband, and like there's like a letter writing and like all kinds of stuff. Like that's where the conflict comes from.
Yeah, I don't know anything about the rule set. I just know that it exists. Um, and I've had conversations with people, and uh what I've talked about and what they've mentioned goes in one ear and out the other, just because it's not anything that appeals to me. I would play it just to learn the rule set and see like what mechanics are used for the social aspects of the game, because I really feel that is an aspect where D&D does lack. There is not a good way to have a social conflict beyond, oh, can you do persuasion, intimidation, and deception checks? Like,
It's
there is not.
it's not very exciting.
It's not. There needs to be other things. Somebody who has social clout, needs to be able to walk into a room and be like, damn, that's impressive.
Ted,
Just like the freaking barbarian wading through, a sea of orcs with blood splattering all over the place as the axe is flying.
Ted, I can definitely
They
see you dressing up for a Jane Austen game.
Sure. Well, I mean, I adore Halloween. I love getting into costumes. So yeah, I would do that in a heartbeat. Um, but it's just, it's something that like I said, I feel like that's something that D&D is missing, and from a role playing perspective, it could be really cool of like, okay, how do you bring this in to the social, pillar of the game to be able to have that kind of challenge and to run, that kind of game. You could then change, well, what does a political game mean? As pieces are moving across the political chessboard, be like, okay, this is now a different aspect of the game. But D&D's never had anything like that. You've got role playing, but role playing didn't really exist when D&D was created. It was meant as like, you start at the dungeon and then fight the monsters and get the treasure, and no no insult meant for what its creation was intended, but it's grown and evolved since then. We've gotten, lore that is much richer in a lot of ways beyond, oh, the crazy wizard did it. Now, yeah, some things, the lore I don't necessarily agree with, and I make changes where necessary. But the pillars have been added in since the beginning. Um, moving beyond, I do feel
Well,
levels
I would push
are
back on that a little bit and say they were
sure.
always there. They've just been better defined in this latest edition. Yeah, exploration has always been a part of the game. There's a reason why you bought the 10-foot pole, right, in the beginning.
Sure.
And
Sure.
even in the, I think it was first or second edition, you got the adventuring party leaving out the spool of thread
Oh yeah.
while the trolls following them and wrapping it up. So it's always been
Sure.
there. It's more prevalent, in 5e and better defined for something that's still not defined great as far as like mechanically, like it doesn't mean anything because there's this conflict that happens between the rules and the mechanics and the game itself, especially when it comes to the social pillar. Like that is the weakest of the three pillars, as you kind of pointed out already,
Mhm.
because like you can do all the role playing in the world, but then like if your DM's like, okay, give me a persuasion check, like, and that's what they're gonna go by. Yeah, because pretty much
And
nobody ever does roll first, role play second, and maybe that's how it should be, because if you do an amazing role play, but then you roll a natural one, and you have a negative one, you just got a zero for your amazing performance.
and I've had a situation that I felt like I didn't need to roll, but the DM called for it, and I rolled crappy, and you know I didn't have enough wherewithal as a player of like, oh well, I need to change the narrative of what was said and what was done.
So
uh
I think that's not your fault. I would put the onus on I would put the onus on the DM, because if you're a DM and you know that you're going to require a check, require the check first, and
right.
then ask the player how this plays out, right? Like role play that result. That
Mhm.
makes I think that makes more sense. I know we've kind of gone back and forth in different videos, and you and Ryan kind of went head to head and argued on it, but I think I kind of agree with, like, if you're going to, like, as a GM, you can go let them role play and then decide, well, one, you're not going to require a roll, or two, like how they role play affects the roll. But that's still risky in the sense that you're
Sure.
like, I'm going to give them a +10 because that was amazing. But the DC's a 15, they've got a -1, and they just rolled a 1. So,
Right.
like, it's still failure. So it's like, how do you fix
Right.
that?
So you have to have situations that, like, as a player now, like if I say something that I'm role playing and the DM calls for it, like, okay, well, if I fail, like, I feel like I need to modify, like, okay, well, how did I screw this up? Maybe these words came out, but they came out too fast, or they came out too slow, or like, something else about, the situation, you know, changed. And I'm okay with adapting and learning and what have you, because that is part and parcel of becoming a better player, better person at the table. And sure, Ryan and I were heated at that moment over a stupid intimidation check. And I probably, gird and argued like crazy on the video, but it's not a big deal. Like, when it all comes down to it, like, I didn't respect him as the DM in that moment and accept his decision. And I should have, because ultimately, when somebody is sitting in the chair, they're the DM, they get the ultimate say. It doesn't matter what you think as a player, DM's in charge.
Well, but
So,
also too, like, actually, I want to retract a little bit what I said of it being, the DM's fault, but maybe it's the fault of the designers, right? Like, you um, maybe it should be laid out better. Like, oh, or maybe I'm just misremembering the rules because I read the books so long ago and so many editions floating in my head. But maybe it should be laid out as the process of, hey, social interactions happen like this. Use these are the checks based on this. Make the roll, and then the players can describe or role play how how the scene transpires based on the role. Like maybe it needs to be spelled out in the rules so that everyone has this common reference and it's not left to every DM to just try and like figure out. Now there's
but
some freedom in that, but there's also problems with it.
but that also comes down to, as we said already, the social pillar of the game is the least supported. It's a pillar, but it's on shaky grounds.
Yeah.
Now you can have, and we have had sessions where the entire session is nothing but role play. So like it can stand on its own, but the second that something gets close to the edge, like it's like, okay, well, what do I do here? Like how can I handle this aspect of the game that there's nothing to hold me up here. But I think as the game goes on, I think we'll eventually get more rules in that direction, because I think they're needed.
Maybe. Maybe. But I guess we're gonna get some more rules soon, so we'll be able to take a look and see if they address it there or not, or if we're still waiting, we'll have to wait till sixth edition, in another 3 years, whatever. The powers of be decide they need more money, or no, it'll just be an update. It'll be an update. It'll all be digital at that point, and it'll be like you have to pay for the upgrade or whatever.
Only time will tell.
Spellhawk Press. Well, we're at the halfway point if there's halfway point thing.
The only thing, is, as you said, you're going to be at Gen Con. So, I would imagine Dave will put any kind of, you know, location updates if he wants to, do any kind of get together with fans that are going to be at Gen Con. So stay tuned to, Facebook or Twitter or whatever have yous, if that becomes an option. Um, I know Dave and I are going to be at the Indiana Castle next month, with uh, the castle and with Gen Con. I imagine there's going to be a little bit less on our live stuff. Um,
Yeah, definitely. Because I so next week, I'm leaving Tuesday for Gen Con, so we won't be able to do the game. And I'm coming back Monday, so the live chat might be iffy for Monday because I'm gonna be driving all day.
so we won't have the game on the 30th. We probably won't have the live chat on August 5th. When we look into August, Dave and I are going to be traveling on the 17th, and returning probably the 22nd. So there will not be a live chat on the 19th or the game on the 20th. So apologies for those things going on, but Nerdarchy is out and about and doing things in the world. So
Yeah. So, but I will say, if you do see us or see me at Gen Con, feel free to come up. Knuckle bumps, handshakes, high fives, hugs, whatever. Uh, More than happy to say hello. And it's kind of a standing rule. If I've got time and there's nothing going on, if like three or more Nerdarchy fans gather, we generally will run a game for you. Has been kind of like the thing that we've done throughout the existence of Nerdarchy. Also, my table's full at the castle, but there might be slots for Ted. Not positive, but I think there are other slots still available. Or if you just want to scale the castle walls, infiltrate, and sneak in for previous stated knuckle bunks, high fives, hugs, or handshakes, feel free. I don't know if there's legal ramifications or whatever, but I support you in this endeavor.
I will say that should you tag along with other Nerdarchy fans to a siege of Mohican Castle, I'm gonna say that we're not gonna be able to impromptu game at your siege of Mohican Castle.
That'll be
Uh,
greatly frowned upon, I do believe.
because we have things going on, and Dave literally doesn't have a whole lot of free time because he will be doing a 36-hour, amount of gaming over 3 days. So that is literally half his time of those days. So he's got meals, sleeping, and 9 gaming sessions to do. So
Yeah. Parks wants to know, can a fan run a game for you all? Absolutely. I'm fairly certain it's happened in the past more than once. So we're always down to play with new people, either as the GMs or as players.
100%.
As a matter of fact, as a player, it's such an easy sell.
It's like, wait a second, I just get to play.
Yeah.
What do you mean? This doesn't make any sense. Usually I'm drafted into the DM spot.
Yeah, but yeah, we would like either of those things. So that's what we. Oh, also Zoom Mafia. We keep threatening to relaunch this Kickstarter. We are going to do it. I'm going to have some time to start working on the plan to do that very shortly. So that's the thing. And also kind of like dovetailing into the conversation we've been having about D&D and what makes D&D feel like D&D. We recently had play tested a new rule and changed out the dice. We went from D6s to D12s that are repeating D6s and only having the boss show up on the 12. And, the feedback that I got after the game from someone that I greatly respect in the industry was my concern with switching the dice was, would it still feel like Zoom Mafia? And it was the difference was marginal as far as how the game played out. It's just like the bosses with doubles showing up just happened a little bit less. But they said to them it still felt the same. The game still played the same, and it gave us an excuse to use D12s. So in the chat, if you happen to be watching right now, let us know. Do you think you prefer a D12 or a D6 for a game mechanic? Um, with that, back into our
uh,
normal stuff, the normal
so
programming.
I know it's far flung future, but one last order of business. Dave and I always go to PAX Unplugged. So if you are looking to kind of hang out or get into a game with us, we're definitely going to be there. But we're also going to be at Page in January, which is
Yeah,
the Philadelphia
page
Area
two.
Gaming Expo. Page two, sorry.
Yep.
Philadelphia Area Gaming Expo. There are going to be a ton of special guests at Page two. So if you can't make it to Gen Con or D&D in a castle, but you still want to come out and hang with yours, truly, or whatever, uh this is not your only option. So
And page two will both be running games. So I'm sure I plan on trying to run some impromptu Zoo Mafia, and I also uh will be running some of my Under the Dome games there as well. So
I threw up a Zoo Mafia game, and impromptu whatever could possibly happen depending upon what goes on. But we're looking to keep getting Zoo Mafia out there, get it in front of more people, more players. It's a great game. Like I said, everyone who's played alongside me or in one of my games has absolutely loved it. So we know it's a great game, and we want to see that happen. But
All right.
now back to our regular scheduled program.
What what makes D&D D&D? So, I guess one of the things too is kind of the lure, but the lure kind of shifts and changes from edition to edition. And I will say, like, one of the things that 5e has kind of done pretty well, I think they've actually done a well of kind of cleaning up the lure and in some areas just making it better and more interesting.
Mm-hmm. There's a couple of things in like the newer updates that I'm not thrilled about. But for the most part, uh, adding layers to things that didn't exist before. In last week's chat, you brought up to me like or you brought up, the aspect of what I found out in Knowles. Like that didn't exist before, but Knoll shamans turning hyenas into Knolls was really cool. It was so unique, that Dave, who had been playing the game for more than 25 years when I did it, honestly thought I came up with it because it was so interesting. But like, nope, that's right out of the freaking monster manual, and
Yeah.
it's a throwaway sentence.
Well, I would
But
say the original release of 5e really did a great job with adding and expanding lore. Since then, they've kind of really done their best to beat it into a bland, rule like paste wherever they possibly can and say that magic did it.
right. So hopefully we'll get, adjustments that make sense and that are a lot more fun than, oh, magic did it, because it just goes back to the crazy wizard did it. And
Yeah.
that was something that I liked, the change away from that. I'd love to see, these hybrid things like owlbear not be anything like, oh, the crazy wizard did it, and it's like, nope, that's just a beast. Like, there's nothing special about the owlbear. Like, the owl bear is literally just a more powerful bear. Just call it a beast and be done with it. It's not a monstrosity. It's not something insanely made. It's just a creature. When you look at the things that are in Avatar, like, oh, it's a monkey bird, or it's a, this, or it's a that. It's a normal creature. It just, to our viewpoint, it's two things mushed together.
Man,
That doesn't
I'm
make,
gonna definitely have to push up the glasses on the bridge of my
well,
nose there. Well,
actually,
actually, the monkey bird came from Pirates of Darkwater.
I honestly, I don't know if there was a monkey bird in Avatar or not. That's what jumped into my brain. And yes, monkey bird is totally from Pirates of Darkwater. Now that you say it,
That was such a great.
except they didn't finish it.
Yeah, well, that is always an issue, but it was great up until that point.
It,
It left you wanting
what
more, right? So like,
um no, but so like if you were to take these things and just be like, no, they're established, they're not the crazy wizard did it, they're just weird things.
mm,
um and if you look at the real world, there are plenty of things that don't make a whole lot of sense. Like, why are there birds that can't fly? Like, they don't fit with the other avians, but they're considered avians, so whatever. uh so D&D has these things that they don't fit with everything else, but you know what, it doesn't have any powers, so it doesn't need to be a monstrosity. Make it a beast. Give them access to to druids that can change into these weird things, and let it be done. But that's enough ranting.
hmm,
uh so other things that are D&D, that are D&D, you've got to have the ability to get more powerful. Like, if you play mutants and masterminds, though it's a much longer character creation process. When you make your character, that is for the most part what you are going to be. You're not going to drastically change. If you make a level 1 character in D&D, you are a drop in the bucket in comparison to what you could be. And the course of play, gaining 20 levels, gaining magic items, possibly legendary and artifact level, abilities, you can be vastly different. Whereas in other games, that's just not there. So the ability to become grossly more powerful than what you started is an aspect of D&D, and that's to me, it's an aspect of the game that it's not needed, but I love when it happens. I love the power dynamic shift that is possible.
I mean, it's such a core concept now when it comes to gaming that like it's been adopted in so many other formats. There's so many video games. I think there's probably even board games that do it to an extent. Other RPGs do it. So that is very D&D. There's a comment, Ted Hahn. What makes D&D D&D? The players and the stories. Yeah, but also like you could say the same about like any TTRPG really, right? It's always going to be like, what the players do and the stories you guys create at the table. I think that experience isn't really exclusive to Dungeons and Dragons, but to TTRPGs in general. Because that is like the cool thing about our tabletop RPGs anyway. It's just like you have these lived experiences with people that don't really exist. Like when they've done, I think when they did studies, like when people talk about things that happen in a game, they talk about what they personally did, and it'll talk from a first person. Where like if you read a book or absorb like almost any other media, you don't put yourself in that place. It's just something
Right.
you're just an observer. Where
So
like you feel like you actually slew the dragon.
I think what he's trying to say is like to some people, D&D is what I did, the experience you have at your table. And that is what D&D can be for each of us. Now, I don't know, your experience, beyond what you've shared at the table and what you've said, or what I've been able to glean from my own insight rolls. But like the people out there, D&D is going to be a feeling. It's going to be a shared thing. It's going to be a history of what you've done with your collected experience. And no one can take any of that away, but also like nobody ever gets to have the same experience. Nobody else knows the pain that I felt when Grevin the Beardless One died. Sure, it was my first D&D character's death, but it was part of the building process of making me the D&D player I am. But it's part of my D&D journey, so it's part of D&D to me.
That absolutely makes sense. Like and like we all learn through the game in different ways, and these shared immersive storytelling experiences, as Spellhawk Press points out, is what I think is what draws a lot of us to the game. Right? We all play for different
Mm-hmm.
reasons, but I think like me and you, we're there to tell the stories. We may enjoy different aspects of the stories to different degrees, but at the end of the day, that's what we like as storytellers, as GMs. We like to help facilitate the story that our players are creating. I love just throwing out all kinds of problems and seeing what my players kind of do with it.
And that works for every game that's out there, you know any rule set, but I didn't want to like completely discredit that last comment about like, oh well, it's the experiences. Well, D&D is that, but it has to be like just acknowledge that the experience of D&D for each individual is going to be different. So therefore, while it might be marginally different, it's always going to be different for some. Like there are players out there who were like D&D is combat. They want they want the dungeon crawls. They want to kick in the door, kill the monsters, and get the shit and get more powerful. And that's D&D. There are some players who were like, I'm here for the theater. I'm gonna role play. I'm gonna engage with everything else, and I'm gonna when we get to combat, I'm gonna sit and I'm gonna wait my turn and do whatever I have to do to get back to the role play.
Well,
There are some who love the lore of it, and like they want to see what stories are crafted by the DM and the world that they get to exist in. Um, so the experience becomes different based off of your expectations, your perceptions, and what have you. Um, but all of it is D&D. All of it is there, ready to be consumed, lived in, and possibly died through.
so when we play Shadow of the Demon Lord,
Mm-hmm.
did it like did it feel any different than say playing D&D with your D&D?
Story wise, no. Mechanically, it functioned differently. I had a lot of fun with it because mechanically I could do things that were outside of D&D. I was uh like I couldn't let me try to get this in my head. When I sit down at a D&D table, I know the rules. I know how everything works, and even if I disagree with the DM on a rules call, I acknowledge, okay, well they're the DM, and I'm just gonna sit here and you know accept their ruling. When I'm playing, Shadow of the Demon Lord, I know my character and I know the core rules, but I don't know enough about the game. So when a new spell, gets used against the party, it's like, oh, I wasn't aware of that. Like, or when a new monster shows up, like I don't know. Like, so it's all surprising. Now I've had new spells and new monsters, made and used against me, all the time, but very rarely is a new mechanic used in D&D. It's usually just a twist or an adjustment here and there. um like when you had the three monsters that were a shared hit point pool that merged into a new creature, like, okay, you did like a mythic transition, and I acknowledged, oh, that's what that was. This is kind of cool. um you know but it wasn't like, while I was shocked that it happened, like, because we were really hurting, um it wasn't like a, oh my god, I was so surprised, kind of moment. Whereas I felt in Shadow the Demon Lord, there were more of those kind of moments because it's a slightly different rule set as a base. um
It's
and
your own
like even
fault.
the
You put out a really
players.
cool mini, and I'm like, I'm definitely using this mini.
And that's fine too, and sometimes that's what I do. Like, I've put together, oh well, I want to use this particular mini, so I think I have to make a stat block for it, and I've done that too. But like with Shadow of the Demon Lord, I'm surprised by what the DM does. I'm surprised by what the other players can do, because I didn't learn any other character classes
Yeah.
because I'm just playing mine, and there are so many different layers to characters in this game or that game versus D&D, that it's like, head spinning, probably just like to someone who was just entered 5e and there's all these choices.
Plus, D&D does not have hateful defecation jokes,
There is no hateful defecation. That is true.
which is a very very Demon of the Shadow Lords thing. You guys can look up on your own. But
Shadow of the Demon Lord, not Demon of the Shadow Lord.
is that what I said? I have no idea. Um, Words just fly out of my mouth sometimes. But we are at 9 o'clock, and I want to thank everyone for hanging out with us. Thanks for joining us and discussing D&D, and until next time, stay nerdy.
Stay nerdy.